of you on the line who probably have heard a lot of this already. I've given a version of this talk several times this year because of the nature of this red tide event. I must have put a few new things in here, so stay tuned towards the end. And for those of you who don't know, what we're going to be talking about is this red tide, so a dinoflagellate bloom that turned quite deadly for the organisms in Southern California, many of the fish and invertebrates, and I'll get into why we think that happened. And I think there's a few people here who don't know much about these so-called red tides that occur all over the world. We certainly have them here in California current. These are some canonical images from the Scripps period that date back quite a ways. It was a very dramatic event that gives you a nice sense of the ocean color during these events. But the nighttime color isn't associated with these, and we saw a lot of that this year. So this bioluminescence is a feature of many of the dinoflagellate blooms, in particular one type that we see. And we had this cool exhibit some of you have probably caught at Birch Aquarium at Scripps. It's gone now. Mike Latz from Scripps and an artist collaborated to make this infinity cube so that people could really get a sense of that 3D structure in the water column and what it looked like from the perspective of a plankton. Mike also put together the time series. This is not 100% comprehensive with respect to every kind of big bioluminescent event that we've seen in the Southern California bight. Give you a sense of big events and how frequent they have sort of become if you look at the latter half of this time series. And to put that to what we've seen this time around, this bloom was about 20 times larger than even those largest blooms on record. And I say that with respect to chlorophyll, with respect to the cell counts of the organism, which typically in a very, very big bloom might be 1 million cells per liter, but we were seeing on the order of 9 million cells per liter this time around. And something upwards of 1,000 milligrams per meter cube chlorophyll. So just really phenomenal. You'd think we were in the Chesapeake Bay or something.
Hey, Clarissa.
Yeah.
Your connection's just a little unstable. Maybe if you turn off your video, it'll flatten out a little bit.
Okay, hold on one sec here. I think I exit stage left for a second. It's probably because of the competing. There we go. Let me know if the problem persists.
Sounds good.
So what I'm showing you now are some of the common players for a lot of these blooms: Lingulodinium polyhedra, Procentrum, Serratium. They're not red algae. I think most of you guys know this, that a lot of this red tide misnomer is more a function of the way our eyes see the ocean color when chlorophyll biomass is really high, and really most phytoplankton can do that. It just so happens that more often than not, when we see that in California, it's Lingulodinium polyhedra, and these guys really love stratified conditions. But they of course need nutrients, and so there's a little bit of a puzzle there. I'm not in presenter mode. I mean, I'm not in presentation mode. So how did this start? There was speculation about the fact that we had massive rain in April, and into really kind of the end of March and huge amounts in April as well. So you can see the anomalies here in this plot, things that were like 200% above normal. Sounds like a dream to us now, given the state we're in with the wildfires. But that was the case of things in Southern California in spring, led to a lot of speculation about anthropogenic or terrestrial derived nutrients that might be in this bloom into place. But I do want to point out that even though this was during COVID, we were all locked down, there wasn't a lot of sampling going on, we did have some autonomous sampling that shed some light on this, and that was the fact that at the Del Mar mooring, which sits on Isobath, is run by Uwe Senn Group, there was an imaging flow cytobot still not deployed right now. It was during one of these deployments that we caught some beautiful imagery of what the phytoplankton were doing just offshore. And that's what I'm showing you in this micrograph. You'll see, you know, a whole assemblage of stuff here, but certainly plenty of diatoms, certainly some Pseudonychia, but then of course a lot of dinoflagellates too, and most of those in that lower right quadrant are Lingulodinium, as it was starting, but it wasn't quite at bloom levels yet, and that's at the end of March. So it may very well be that nutrients near shore were important in helping this bloom get going, but I will note that things were happening out of shelf as well that might have been more disconnected from that runoff. So that's a beautiful picture. There've been a beautiful picture of Mike Lat, that one of a certain night. This bioluminescence went on for weeks and weeks, and it was really, really phenomenal. I tried to pull together other data to illustrate everything that was happening from in a cross-shore sense. And these are data from Dan's group. Gives us a little bit of a sense of what was happening with the uplift of isopycnals up towards the coast here. You can see some elevated chlorophyll April to May. And then you can see the dissolved oxygen from those gliders as there was sort of this depletion near the coast. And this becomes important as we think about the evolution of the bloom and what started to happen as we went into May. But I want to just show you the synoptic picture. So Mati has like a satellite product. You're seeing that on the left. That's the chlorophyll, the derived chlorophyll. It was definitely high in Santa Barbara. All Baja, we have many, many reports of the bloom and some interesting work that has come out of that and from the city group. Right, you'll see the derived chlorophyll from the Sentinel, the Olchi product, and there the higher chlorophylls a little further south than say the one left, but Mike has been working up the his dinoflagellum in a paper they're working on right now. And so if you just look to the left, what you're seeing on the right is supposed to, or the hope is that this really does pull out that by exploiting the fact that the ecosporin-like amino acid absorption peak 380. Because there is a new light sensor, this sensor will finally run this DEX. It's been a little bit of a dream for a long time from Mati and Greg's group to be able to really do this with satellite data. And so this is what, and this illustrates bloom was more concentrated. If you're really thinking about the red tide and not just high chlorophyll where there was already a spring bloom happening everywhere, this would suggest that the bloom or to sort of LA County down to Baja. So temperatures were, this is a big question the media had. You know, what were the rain? What was temperature doing? Temperatures were high. They weren't the period of bloom getting going, fairly normal with respect to springtime conditions. But as we went into, as the bloom evolved, and see how many times at the Scripps Pier audit, the Emmanuel Shore Station, that we use record levels of temperature. So media was all over that. They really wanted to know what the relationship was, if any. And I think there is a relationship. Most certainly saw kind of a perfect set of conditions for this bloom to form. If you look at the CDIP temperatures up and down the coast, you can see just how anomalous in that purple line they were relative to the climatology. And I think not only did the bloom going have nutrients from various sources, and I'll explain a little more where we think all the nutrients were coming from. As those temperatures were increasing, you just had this perfect condition. Stratification was being set up. There was no mixing. We had no winds during that period. And the bloom just really held on, and it had to have a nutrient source to do that, but the temperatures really helped it go. And we are into, Drew and others, Drew Lucas, are looking into the fact that this biomass surface is also going to that sense of increasing the temperature in the water. And so there is certainly a positive feedback loop there. And this is just a nice synoptic sense of how warm things were in the world during that bloom. So nutrients. My sound better, Dylan?
It's still intermittently choppy. I'm not sure what we can do about it other than just to press on, but
that's a bummer. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
I'll just go a little slower. So Drew was working with U's group and with Kristen Davis, and they have some SCOOS money, as it turns out, this last year to do some deployments of the wire walker with a nitrate sensor and look at nutrient delivery onto the shelf, explicitly for this reason, to think about how we get productivity from things like the internal wave dynamics coming up through the canyons and onto the shelf. And they collectively moved mountains to get this sensor out during the time of COVID. We were on lockdown in those early days, more so than we are now. And I don't have time to go into all of it. I was hoping Drew would give his version of this talk, which really is something to see when you hear about the wire walker, how it was deployed, what these capabilities are. Very briefly, I want to highlight that you're seeing the chlorophyll and the backscatter in those first two panels, and then the anisopycnol nitrate anomaly at the bottom. So this is something they're able to do with these high frequency wire walker data. And what you really need to note is that there was quite a bit of nitrogen coming into the system, nitrate in particular, since that's the only sensor we had, that was getting drawn down. And what you're seeing is, as the drawdown happens, you can see that increase in chlorophyll and the spikes in backscatter. And these incredible pulses of increased nitrate, drawdown, increased chlorophyll, and then back to higher nitrate as it comes back into the system. And I think this is most likely connected to an internal tide, as Drew would explain it, which is very interesting. It's different from that story of these, these oxidous, whatever, nutrients coming in. So we need to just think about that some more, working on it with his team, and I think that there will be a cool paper that comes out of that. And I wanted to just show you too that Jules JavaScript's plankton camera, kind of similar to the IFCB, the imaging flow cytobot, uses machine learning as well to capture these images and describe them in a classification. So seeing here, Lingulidinium, as that bloom really took hold, there was so much Lingulidinium in the water. And Melissa Carter took this picture, which is very illustrative of just what these blooms look like as they're decaying and how sticky they get, all the exudates that clump them together. And you're seeing just that immense clumping in this little video. So this is the end, kind of the end stage of a bloom. All right, next, which is what happened when it got deadly. This is what the beaches started to look like. Lots of foam. Anyone living in Southern California knows that the stench was unbearable for at least 2 full weeks, if not longer. Why would that be? Well, luckily there were a number of sensors out, and still are in some places. Jen Smith has a dissolved oxygen sensor at its pier. Really fascinating to look at this time series from February on, where you can see the kind of hovering around this 8 milligrams per liter, starts to get here in the spring as the bloom is forming, and then just becomes incredibly variable. Not only that, starts to drop below that really critical dissolved oxygen threshold for biota to survive, getting all the way down to 0 for prolonged periods, even a week at a time. And that really is quite amazing to have something that's just totally incompatible with life. And then on top of that, the pH just is insane. Again, hovering a little bit high, a little bit above 8, gets into the spring, starts to get variable, becomes extremely variable, dipping as low as 7 for days in a row. So that's pretty dramatic. Certainly would lead to the death of many organisms. And we did see this. The beaches were just littered with critters, kind of invertebrate you can think of, a lot of fish. This little video is loud. Just turn it down. This is just one video. There were many citizen science efforts to get out there and document the extent of the carnage. But another interesting thing outside of that, what was happening in the aquaria. People were bringing water in both at Southwest Fisheries and at Birch Aquarium to support their organisms, and you can see that red water down in the lower right being brought in. And a lot of these flow-throughs were being enhanced with dissolved oxygen, but the animals were still dying. And this little octopus, for instance, didn't make it. And it really made us question whether there were toxins in the water as well. And I had kind of alluded to the fact that some of these things are not very harmful, or maybe I meant to, but Lingulodinium is known to produce something called yesatoxin, and some of these others can be toxic too. So it was really important that we examine that, given some of the issues that have happened in the past, papers that have published that there is sometimes low levels of yesatoxin. The DeWitt paper that's referred to here is really Sonoma County invertebrate that was connected to yesatoxin, a slightly different dinoflagellate though. So we were able to get emergency response from NOAA NCOS to look at, they really want to know if there are emerging yesatoxin problems or other toxins in the water column. So we got those funds. It's been a really nice collaboration with a group here at Scripps, and we're not only interested in the fact that the water could have been contaminated with toxins in addition to the hypoxia and anoxia, but that there were also aerosol issues going on simultaneously. So we brought in groups like Kim Prather's group to look at the aerosols, and then some other heavy hitters in the chemical world. So these are just some preliminary results that we have right now. Eva Turnon, who's a postdoc in the Gerwick lab, has really spearheaded a lot of this work. I will probably misrepresent a lot of it, but I wanted to get the point across that yesatoxin was detected in the cells, dissolved organic matter, and in the aerosols. We already knew this from the CISESE group. They had been looking at this too for the Baja samples and seeing that there was quite a bit of yesatoxin. We're still working a little bit more on the quantification, but it's really, there's another component to this that has yet to be understood, and that's some of these mysterious sulfur compounds that we're also finding in all of these samples that could have something to do with some of the respiratory problems that we heard about from surfers during this time. And so we have a lot more work to do in this regard, but on the side of the surfers, we were really interested in getting to the bottom of this. So much anecdotal evidence over the years about these red tides and bioluminescent events giving people irritation or giving people some kind of respiratory distress. Nothing really documented, certainly not conclusively for California. So in an effort to get at that, granted, we have no business doing these kinds of surveys, we have no training, but we worked with Surfline and Surfrider to distribute this to a really broad community. We got a really nice feedback. This was, you can see a smattering of the questions at the bottom of the slide here that we asked. There were a lot of questions. We had 872 responses. We're still working through those data to understand them better, but it did appear as though upwards of maybe a quarter of the respondents did experience some kind of distress. The issue was that these people were experiencing things just like COVID, right at the time when COVID on everyone's mind. But what we heard from so many people was that once they took an Allegra or a Zyrtec, all of their issues went away. So it was maybe more akin to an asthmatic or allergic response rather than viral. But a lot of this is yet to be determined. And then the last thing I want to say is we have a special issue about the bloom coming out. We've had a couple of little mini symposia. There are a lot of people at Scripps and elsewhere in Southern California looking at these data. Incredible amount of, I would just say, a multidisciplinary approach to look at this thing coming from every single angle. And it really is fascinating from just the side of the hypoxia is its own story. So that's going to be in a journal called Elementa, UC Press publication. This is the name of the special issue. If you have anything that you'd like to submit, please let me know. And then there's the Red Tide Bulletin that came out. It's really a lot of what I showed you is in that. It's part of our California Hab Bulletin that you should sign up for if you're not already on the listserv. And that's it. I'd be saying let's dance, but it's going to have to wait till next year. Thank you.
Thank you, Clarissa. That was great. And your connection was perfect the last half of the talk, so that was great.